What's up? I hope you're doing well. The MacBook Pro M4 has just launched, and I was checking out the landing page when I came across this nice display section. It's a common pattern for Apple sites to display this really large, vivid image, and then as you scroll down, it kind of reveals that it's on the display of the device. You also notice here there's a subtle movement up of the text as well as it scrolls down. So we've got a pinning of the image, scaling down on scroll, and then the text sliding up. And I thought it'd be a nice, fun, quick video to rebuild that. And this is the end result. So we'll be coding this from scratch together. It's built inside Next.js, TypeScript, uses GSAP ScrollTrigger, which is one of the freely available plugins, and styling is done using Tailwind CSS. Hope you enjoy, and let's get started. All right, let's go. So I've got a blank page here, and the process will be roughly as follows. We need to add the heading, the span, the image here, and then the paragraph beneath it, which is this here. Then we will look at actually scaling this image as the user scrolls down. So we're going to need to pin it so that it doesn't scroll out of view. And then finally, we will slide up this text at the bottom. So you see here, just as this is finishing, the paragraph comes up beneath it. It's a kind of nice little touch that they've added there. Okay, I'm going to get cracking and put a section in of the H2. So you'll see that they used a H2 for the word display, then a P tag for see it in a new light. Where's it gone? Stick some Tailwind classes on here. I'm not too concerned with getting the exact font styles here. That's not really the purpose of this video. Can check the computed down here. So 64 font size, font style normal. And this one is semi-bold, 21 pixels. I'm going to put a block here just to create some padding here above it. Okay, let's run this then. Whilst I'm waiting for that to load, I'll use the next image component Also placing that paragraph beneath it. God, there's a lot here. Can't even find it. There we are. I'm excited for this new MacBook. I'm actually due an upgrade. Currently working on an M1 Pro. I'm going to set it to pure black because the Tailwind variable that I have on this project is slightly off black. So in terms of grabbing the image, I'll actually just save this. They've used a JPEG with a black background, and presumably that's to save space. It doesn't have the alpha layer, which a PNG would have. So quite often it is good practice to use JPEGs or WebP files when you can. Okay. Don't know what's going on with the font though. It's a bit better. I'll stick some horizontal padding on here. Yeah, we're also going to need something beneath this to actually allow us to scroll down. Yeah. All right. The actual image itself, seems to have stopped working. Yeah, so the image of the MacBook is within a section that is basically full screen, and that's the element that gets pinned. So what I'll need to do here is probably put something around the image, and then this can be height, say large view height and width full with an overflow hidden on it. I'll stick a border on it. Gonna want classes on the image, but not sure just yet what they are. We're also gonna want to set a max width on this. Yeah, okay. Now the container of the image should center the image. Like that. I want to make this text a bit larger, maybe some. It's actually quite a bit bigger. It's also bold or semi-bold. Most of it has either a reduced opacity or a grey colour. See, they've just used a grey colour there with a span on liquid Retina X display. Make that white and then make this, say, I've got a light grey colour. It's not light enough. So it looks close size-wise. It will not be as wide though. It's also not as loose as this, so we can do a snug. Yep. And we'll stick some padding on this. Increase the width again. Okay. So that's the initial markup complete. I suspect that a few things will need changing as we move into the pinning of the image. Let me know in the comment what computer you're using. It'd be interesting to hear. So the use GSAP hook is what I'm going to be writing here instead of a use effect. It basically does the same thing as use effect, except it cleans up the animations. So if either the dependencies change or the component is torn down, we can define a scope which will make it easier to use kind of generic query selectors. So if I put a ref on the container or the section, it's worth noting as well that I've set this page to be a client component. Use GSAP and useref won't work otherwise. ScrollTrigger, it's not defined. Yeah, so I'm registering the ScrollTrigger and I'm also registering the use GSAP hook. I'm going to import ScrollTrigger from the dist folder. Oh, we're back up and running. So the image itself, if we analyze the Apple implementation, I'm going to need to reload it. So we'll see that there's a matrix transform applied to it, and that is scaling it to, well, it looks like it's scaled to about 1.2, and then it scales down to 0.46. There's also what looks like a slight, I assume that's a Y translation. I'm not too familiar with the matrix transformations. But either way, we want to start it big and then we want to bring it down. A simpler way to do this would be to set the kind of final image size as we want it, like we've got here, and then just scale it up, because then you're always returning to scale 1, which is then also more responsive if this changes. But what we don't want is this to happen where it's actually being clipped at the top and bottom. So I imagine that they've got some kind of logic that sizes it based off of the viewport. Actually, I don't need to put an ID on the image, because I can actually just say set image to scale 2. Not a class. Yeah. Got an issue here that the padding on the outer container is causing that to crop. So this looks more like the kind of initial state of it. So now what we want to do, and I can actually just do can I do 200 on here? Yeah. Sometimes it's preferable to set the initial styles using CSS. It can prevent a kind of initial flash of styles if you're changing them in the JavaScript. So generally set the kind of initial transformation or opacity value using classes. So now what we want to do is we want to create a timeline, and we want to target the image. We want to scale it to 1. And then that should just do that. But we want to attach it to a scroll trigger. And the scroll trigger will be, it will be based off of when the image container hits the top, the viewport, and it will be for a certain duration. So I'm not going to use the trigger as the section. I'm going to use the trigger as the, say, image container. I'm going to start when the top of that reaches the top of the viewport, and will end, for testing purposes, 1,000 pixels later. We also want to set some defaults on the timeline so that we don't have any easing. Yeah, so that is working. Now we want to pin the image container as well. So that's kind of achieved the desired effect there. I think the image definitely needs to be smaller. So I might put a bit of padding on the container. Still not enough padding. And we'll set some sizing on here. So if we did yeah. I'm gonna create a padding class just for now, just so we've got it in one place. Then use Tailwind join to mix that in with our other styles. In fact, could put it on this element here. And then this will have Tailwind join around it. So now that text lines up with our heading above it. Forgot to remove the padding there. Okay. We will put some vertical padding on this as well. Take off the border. This is looking particularly small. What's happened here? Probably doesn't need that. Oh yes, put the horizontal padding, which should be on the container on the actual paragraph itself. Hence why it's become so small there. I'll stick some left margin on this. Maybe a bit more. Obviously this would need to be updated to be responsive. but that kind of works for the image. We could potentially even make it slightly bigger. So we've added the markup, we've handled the image scaling down as the section scrolled, and we've pinned the containing element. Now we want to add the paragraph slide up animation. So it either happens just as that finishes. I think it kind of happens afterwards. So what we want to do is put something on, well, we want to target the paragraph. We've got a timeline that is pinning the section, and if we just say did a from to paragraph and we did 64 to Y0, we would be doing this as the pin is still happening, which we don't really want, because if I save this, what will now happen is this will move. Is it doing that? It doesn't look like it's actually. I'm gonna make this really obvious, and also set its opacity to 0 and its opacity to 1. The issue is that you can't actually see it happening because the height of the pinned container is full screen, so this is actually beneath it. So what we can do is put a negative margin on this to bring it up above it, or we could reduce the height of the pinned container. I'm going to try the negative margin first. We'll stick it relative and Z20, let's say. Yeah, so now this is coming up before it starts to scroll down. There's still too much of a delay. I think that's because the Y value in this animation's too great. Still quite a bit of delay there. And really what we want is for the pinning to finish and then that to happen. So I think what I'll do here is either set up another scroll trigger, which is based off of the paragraph container. And we'll basically say when this starts to enter, then we'll move up the paragraph text. And actually looking at this, seeing as we only have one animation happening, it doesn't need to be a timeline. So I'll refactor this to put the scroll trigger inside the GSAP.2 like this. And we should get the same result. I'll put the scroll trigger in the two part of the paragraph animation. We'll use the P container as the trigger. we'll start it when it gets to, say, the bottom. Say we'll just run it for 100 pixels. We won't be pinning it. And now we'll see how this behaves. Yeah, so that, I think that's kind of the desired effect here. I mean, their Y duration's even less than what I put in there. Okay. The total scroll value could be adjusted if we wanted to, say, just do it over the over a full view height. So if we wanted to do that, we'd say the top reaches the bottom. Oh, actually that does break it, because as soon as you pin the element, you're moving it into or changing it to a fixed position, and so then it can't be tracked. Its sort of scroll position can't be tracked. If I wanted to resolve that, we would need to track the movement of a different element around it. If you actually look at the Apple markup, they've got an image, a div. Yeah, so they do have two. They've actually got 3 elements around it. So that's quite heavily nested. Do we want to do that? I mean, probably not right now. I think I'll just stick it to the fixed 1000 pixel scroll. This is coming a bit too close to it now, and I think that's due to the amount of top margin, negative top margin. I may if I put a little bit more padding at the bottom, so if we actually probably don't need this since we've set a width. We could put a max width full for mobile, and then take off this. Actually, just add a greater value on the padding at the bottom, and that'll shift it up slightly. So now it's closer to their version. All right, I'm reasonably happy with this. Horrified at the thought of seeing what it does on mobile, but perhaps we should do that. So yeah, on mobile, the scale is not adequate. And it's coming down to a width of 3/4, which we wouldn't want. So I would set this as, say, a medium or a large property and set it to full width. So that's a lot better now. There's a huge amount of padding here, and that's because the container is screen height. But we probably don't want it to be screen height. We want it to be the width with an aspect ratio. So rather than having it as the large view height, that might be okay on a larger display. But we definitely want it width full, and maybe we want an aspect on it. So now it's still that height. Why is it like that? Yeah, it definitely needs a bit more height there, doesn't it? The aspect video doesn't quite work here. I'll just set, say, a 50, 60. I mean, that's a lot better. Scale's not enough though, so on a mobile, we would probably be thinking scale 350%. Something like that. Yeah, and ideally, I mean, maybe it should actually be closer to the full height. The margin on this would also only be a larger screen property. Yeah, it's better. I definitely would require a bit more fiddling around with to get that quite right. Let's just check that it's still okay on desktop. Remove the border. A bit more space in between that display. Even more spacing. Tracking tight on this, I think. It's a bit closer. And finally, the horizontal padding is not nearly enough. That's closer. Oh, can we go to 80? What happens with that? Font looks marginally too small, but I think 3x is going to be too big. Yeah. going to reduce that margin slightly. And that's that. Pretty happy with how it's come out. Definitely needs some responsive work doing to it though. Okay, we've made it to the end. So just to recap quickly, we added the markup. The image is inside a container which has overflow hidden so that when we scale it initially, it doesn't cause the window to scroll. Got a few different scale values depending on the viewport width. However, as I said, much more work would need to go into that to properly set it up for mobile and tablet. The image container has an ID, and so inside the use GSAP hook, we can use that as the scroll trigger. And we've got a GSAP tween which scales the image down to 1 after being set in CSS. And it starts when the image container hits the top of the viewport, and it will pin that image container for 1000 pixels of scroll, and it will scrub through the scaling of that. We would probably also want to put an ease none on that so that the movement lines up to the scroll in a kind of linear fashion as opposed to the default ease. We've then also got our paragraph, which has a container. The paragraph container is used as the trigger for the paragraph tween. We're not using the paragraph itself because as soon as we set its Y value will be changing, and so it will screw up the scroll trigger basically because it will be moving it as it's trying to track it. There is a way to resolve that, but in this case it's just simpler to wrap it in a container, and the container then controls the progress of that animation. That's pretty much it really. I hope you enjoyed the video. I had fun making it. If you made it this far, give the video a thumbs up and consider subscribing because I've got loads more videos in the pipeline. Any questions, let me know in the comments. Peace and happy coding.